This week, we speak with Avi Douglen from Bounce Security. In the news segment, we play with the consequences of legacy logins, peruse web shells, look for API patterns, prescribe patching, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. Visit securityweekly.com/synopsys to learn more. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 105, recorded April 27th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hello, Matt.
Good morning, Mike. What a wonderful day.
Pretty wonderful day. Hopefully it's getting bright and sunny and you can and warming up out where you are.
Oh yeah, we're going to get back up into the 60s finally. We might even hit 70s this week. Better than all that snow we had a couple weeks ago.
It was just a few weeks ago too. But we've also got John Kinsella. Hello, John. And I think we don't have audio for John. But we do have him. So those
I'm trying to be all careful and let you guys do your thing. Yes. Hi, guys.
Hello, John. Thank you for this. Thank you for coming with audio. We have officially migrated our mailing list back to our original platform. We apologize for any double mailings or lack of mailings that you may have received in the interim. We have our categories nailed down, and you are now able to customize what you receive from us based on your preferences by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. Once you have joined, you will be able to go back and update your interests so that we can grow with you as you progress through your journey in InfoSec. Going cloud native? See how to integrate application security in our next webcast with Signal Sciences. Learn how penetration testing reduces risk in our May webcast with Core Security, a health systems company. Register for our upcoming webcasts or virtual trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/webcasts. You can also access our on-demand library of previously recorded webcasts and trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. Each webcast will earn you 1 CPE credit that we will submit on your behalf if you provide your ISC² number. Avi Douglen is a prominent security architect and software developer with decades of experience leading development teams and building secure products and protecting complex systems. He enjoys researching efficient security engineering, usable security, and scaling enterprise security systems. He founded Bounce Security to focus on bringing his own brand of efficient software security to a wider range of technology companies and software developers. Mr. Douglen is a frequent trainer and speaker at industry conferences such as OWASP, RSA, B-Sides, and InfoSec, as well as developer conferences such as O'Reilly, DevSecCon, PyCon, and DevOps Days. Hello, Avi. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. I should point out O'Reilly at this point is kind of, of blessed memory.
Well, hopefully you'll give us some memories in this segment, because one of the things we'd like to dive into is one of the foundations of AppSec, which is threat modeling. And just one of the things that stood out to me, just as I was going over your bio, is that not only have you spoken at industry conferences, so security industry, obviously, but also developer conferences, which is probably smart because developers are the ones writing code. So as we let's talk about threat modeling, and as we do that, like kind of interesting to starting off, what's that conversation look like, or how's it different between those two audiences?
Yeah, you raised a really good point. I like to start with the fact that you probably heard Jim Manico quote, all software engineers are security engineers, whether they know it or not, or whether they like it or not. As you say, they're the ones building the software. It is different because they come from a different perspective, a different set of needs. You talk to security people and they're kind of, more conservative, they're more defensive. They want to make sure we've thought of everything. We want to make sure that everything is as safe as it possibly can be. And developers need to get the feature done. They need to roll out new features all the time. They need to be producing more value for the software, right? They need to put out another version on the next sprint. And that's what they're focused on. And if you say, think of everything that could possibly go wrong, that's a different you're speaking a different language here. So for developers, I like to talk about what they need to care about. What they need to care about is whatever feature they're building, whatever value or whatever their goals are. And as security, as the threat modeling that I want to offer them, for them to do themselves, is to put guardrails up around whatever it is they're building, to make sure that what they're building is safe, what they're building is done right. Not to think of every possible attack, because they can't do that. That's not their job. I mean, I've seen places that have tried to force them to do that, and their success has been rather, hopeful in nature.
Not successful,
shall we
perhaps.
say?
Yeah. Plus, my guess, Avi, is under the way we develop applications now with distributed teams, a developer doesn't know the end-to-end application anyway. So how could they think of all the different guardrails, right? You have to kind of scope it based on what they're working on, because they may not know the other pieces that are involved in the application itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many pieces. The most developers developing a microservice right now, they kind of know the context that it's being used in, but it can also be used in some other context. They know who's supposed to be calling them, and then 2 weeks down the line or a year from now, a different set of microservices will be calling their microservice. Have they given thought to all that context? Probably not. Maybe DevOps folks have done that. Maybe the architect have done that, has looked at that. Maybe not. And you can't have that entire full set of context at all point, because that is constantly changing.
Right.
So a lot of that brings up basically how to guide that conversation, if you will, with the developers. And last week we had a good discussion with Rebecca Deck talking about threat modeling and using like a feedback loop to build up policies and standards that developers should be following. And we talked about some articles about different approaches to threat modeling. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, Avi, especially as to Matt's point, it can be really hard to have a full mental model of the entire end-to-end system in your head. And as you rightly point out, the system assumptions can change, especially in a microservices architecture when there are new services interacting. So do you tend to lean on something like Stride or Dread, which is a bit more of, rather than have to think of all the things that can go bad, here is some spoofing, some tampering that Stride kind of nudges you along? Or you also mentioned kind of focusing on the value of what they're building, or kind of maybe a value-driven threat modeling. What's your approach to asking questions for this?
All right, so I mentioned a lot of stuff that I want to unpack there for a bit. First of all, I'll start from the middle. Dread is dead. Okay, Dread is dead. There's a lot of other more common risk rating methodologies that are more interesting. The OWASP has the risk rating methodology. There's a few others out there. I definitely do like to rely on Stride. It does give a good framework for developers to understand the types of things that can go wrong, the things that they should be looking at. But I don't necessarily, whereas as a consultant, I might come in and do a full Stride matrix for every single component in their data flow diagram. I don't necessarily expect that from any developer that's developing, a 3-day microservice. They're not going to be doing all of that as possible. Instead, I give them what I call, value-driven threat modeling. I want them to focus on the value, and I want them to understand what needs to go right. Okay, this is a lot different from the way security people like to think about things, right? It's like a bit more of a positive spin, but I want them to focus on the value, what needs to happen for things to go right. And to do that, so my model, if you're familiar with Adam Shostak's 4-question framework, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? Some of this, I kind of pivot those 4 questions for developers, and I say, first of all, why? Why are you building this user story over that user story, or this feature instead of that feature? Why are you building it right now instead of 3 months down the line? Usually, there's a pretty good reason. And if you talk to your product managers or the product owner, they'll usually have some good reason that this is what will give us the most benefit, the most value, whether it's more eyeballs or selling more product or whatever it is. So that's the why, what we expect to get out of this feature. Secondly, I go after the why, how things need to happen for me to get this value. What is the happy path? What needs to go right? And when I understand the happy path and also the unhappy path, we'll be explicit about that. And I'll come back to that in a second. When I understand how it needs to happen, we can talk about what I need to do to ensure that the user stays on that happy path, or what I need to do to make sure they go to the unhappy path if necessary. And this talks a lot more to the developers in their own language. These are the things that they like to talk about, and these are the things that they deal with in their user story. A couple of years ago at the OWASP, or the Open Security Summit, we took the user story format, right? As a user, I want to buy juice so that my kids can drink juice in the morning. And we said, can we come up with a very catchy little something? And we said, without. As a user, without having my credit card being stolen. So that gives like a small little thing to plug into the way the developers are already working, the way they're already developing their user stories. Just one small little change that's very natural. There's not a lot of detail there, and that gets fleshed out in the conversations later. But this helps plug into the way they're working, helps them focus on the value of what they're doing. So we have the why they're building it, how it needs to happen, and what I need to do for it to go right. And this kind of bring the developers back always to what they need to be doing, what guardrails they need to be putting up to get what they expect to happen. And one other thing that you mentioned before was about assumptions. That's a big thing that I push for developers. You're always going to have assumptions, right? But if you don't write it down, then the next person doesn't have the same assumption. And the only one that finds your assumptions is the attacker. So if you're explicit about your assumptions, you can either validate that in code, or you can document it for the next person down the line, or the next time your microservice gets used in a different context. They can go ahead and verify those things, maybe offline. But the assumptions can be validated one way or the other. And that helps bring back all the things back to the guardrails around the value.
So especially, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you use a very interesting concept, Simon Sinek's golden circle, the why, the how, the why, which is what we try to teach to security companies to try to convey their message. You just use the same framework for the developer. I thought that was a really interesting use of that, because I've never seen it used in a developer context. I've always seen it in more of a marketing context.
The funny thing is that I actually kind of came to that. I read about the Simon's golden circle in the past, and kind of put it in the back of my mind. And I don't know, a year or 3 years later, I started talking in that language already anyway, because focusing on the value. Again, it came from the marketing context, because if you know your value, you can build towards that. And it just really picks up very well for developers also. It plays very well for developers building user stories and features. And at some point, somebody said to me, "Are you talking about Simon's golden circle?" I was like, "Oh, I guess I am," and I didn't even realize that.
Oh, very interesting.
One of the interesting things that was missing, and this will be a bit of a leading question, was the how did we do aspect, though. So because one of the important things of even just engineering, building software, or thinking through threat modeling or risks, and should we put time and effort into addressing this particular risk, or if we have two risks, which one? How do we prioritize among them, or what are the opportunity costs of not doing one? So, if I were to say, well, that fourth question of you mentioned like Adam Shostak's, like how did we do? That seems to be missing from that 3-question model, but is it really, or how would you respond to that?
I'm really glad you raised that, because how do we do is super important threat modeling. Did we find all the threats? Is our understanding still the same? Should our diagram change now that we've gone through this threat modeling exercise? Is there still residual risks? Have we introduced any new risks? It's super important. But here's the thing. If we're not talking about it in a security context, we're talking about for developers, whether they're doing Agile or DevOps or CI/CD, they already have that retrospective built in. They already have that QA built in. They already have that phase of review built in, whether it's design or code. Everything gets reviewed already anyway. So because I'm saying let's not put threat modeling as something separate, but as part of the development design, part of the actual software design, then that just gets picked up on the way. I'm not introducing any new steps there.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then part of that too, then also looping back, is just you're talking about that, the circle. And for marketing, how do you bring this message either to developers themselves, or to bubble it up to the CISO level, or expand, here is the value of doing threat modeling, or perhaps asking this a different way, how do you convey what you've threat modeled or demonstrated, some artifacts from it?
So the cool thing is, because I'm saying we should be doing it as part of the development lifecycle, I'm not saying we should rule out bringing in people like Adam or, Tony or whoever it is, bring in the experts to do their full-size Stride or Apostle or whatever it is, do a full-size threat model, especially if, you're Fortune 500 or an international bank, you need those things. But what I'm talking about now is having developers build a threat model as part of their software design. The only artifact I care about is running code. So if you define threats that need to be mitigated, the list of threats is not important. For documentation, for assumptions, that's important. What's really important is the mitigations that you implemented. Doesn't matter if you designed it and didn't implement it. What matters is the code that you wrote, that you're creating more secure software. And that's what it really comes down to, right? The documentation is great for validation, for pen testers, for auditors. That's all fantastic. But what really matters is what you built, what you roll out into production.
And I assume some of what you build, right, from that user story also turns into a set of tests to validate and regression test against some of those assumptions as well, so that it's not only the code I produce, but it's also probably some of the test cases I produce to validate the software, not only as I build it, but as I continue to maintain it every iteration.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, we're talking, it's the features. So it's not something separate that we need to call in an external pen testing firm to validate this for us. The QA folks already need to be doing this as part of their security, as part of their regression testing. Security testing is part of that, and security requirements are requirements. So I'm basically trying to break down those walls. Sorry,
I said at least we hope they're doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the plan.
So Avi, I've got. I really like this. I like this a lot. But one of the questions that's sort of popping into my head is, have you seen doing this type of methodology, does that work better in some orgs versus others? Because my sense is this requires a little bit less belief in checkbox compliance and a little more executive buy-in that we really care about security and we want to do the right thing. Does that resonate with what you've seen, or do you see this working better in larger or smaller or certain type of organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what you said. I would even go further and say it's not just about not in checkbox places, but in organizations that the CISO understands that it's the software developers that are building the code. As I said in the beginning, they're the security engineers. You have to trust them. Sure, you want to give them tools. Sure, you want to do validation. You want to put a lot of stuff in there. But if you're doing checkbox Olympics, and if you're trying to do command and control structures, that's just not going to work. I first started running into this a few years ago when we tried building an agile SDL. We're talking, 10, probably more, 15 years ago, maybe, before Microsoft came out with their agile SDL. People tried rolling in a standard waterfall SDL on top of agile development, and it kept blowing up in their faces. And realized you need to be able to trust the developers, give them the tools, give them the training, give them the process and the headspace to be able to do this. And most developers, the good developers, the ones that you want working for you anyway, will be able to do this anyway. They'll be able to do this if you give them the tools for it.
So excuse my sniggering. That checkbox Olympics is one of the better phrases I've heard in a while. So I had to write that one down.
That's not mine.
I won't quote you on, but I'll still take that. It's a great phrase. So we agree on that. Now here's the core question behind it. How do you help get those CISOs or whoever is in that? Because it's not always a CISO, right? That's frequently a political position. But how do you get that executive buy-in to realize, hey, we need to do more than just a check go?
So it's actually two almost opposite conversations I have sometimes. Depending on the organization, the head of development might be a lot more into this than the security folks. And the security folks are saying, no, the developers can't do this. I need to do it. And what they say, all threat models are wrong. Some are useful. I'm okay with it being wrong. Yes, it will be wrong. It'll be wrong no matter what. So they'll build a wrong threat model, but it will be useful because you're getting more secure software, more so this way than the other way. And again, I say, you want to do the full scale stride, pasta, whatever kind of consulting driven threat modeling you want to do, go for it. I think that has use too. But that does not scale as much as having the developers do that as part of their process.
Yeah, I think it's hard for security folks to realize that the future of security is embedded in the developers and the application. It's not controlled by firewalls and network devices anymore. And that's a leap of faith that is hard for some security professionals to get over. But that's the world we're moving to as everything moves into this, application cloud environment. The developers are the core components of how security is going to get built, if it's going to get built at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, did I get cut off?
No, keep going.
Go ahead.
Oh, just the video got cut off. I was going to say, a lot of places try and fight the developers into security, and that's just too much friction. That just does not work well. That's not going to end well either.
Yeah, I think the way I would look at that is sort of like trying to say, look, hey, coming from the security team perspective, hey, developers, here's the OWASP top 10. Just don't do these things. Don't have these bad things happen. Whereas it's the other way you could approach that, say, oh, by the way, here's an ASVS or maybe even the OpenSAM to help you developers to understand what you actually should be doing. Or maybe here's how to have a framework for how you're building software. This is a lot easier to tell, to give people a framework to work against rather than just say, don't make mistakes and walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. When I come into a company and I advise the security leaders, I tell them, you need to be a partner. You need to be a supporter. Come in and advise your developers what they could do better. Give them advice, give them tools. Absolutely. Don't fight them because you're going to lose.
So, and that's interesting. So when you've been doing that, kind of looping back to what my early question to, how have you approached, or I guess let me say it this way, how have engineering teams responded to those simple three questions, and are there ways, could you walk us through perhaps an example of things to avoid, or just some ways just to help engineers, become self-serving in that manner, self-service?
Yeah, and it really comes back to the earlier question of what kind of organization. It does not work with all organizations, that's for sure. It needs to be, if I go into a bank that still runs their security on mainframes and, the security team hasn't changed in 20 years, I know that's not going to work. It needs to be a developer-led organization, at least the technology part needs to be developer-led, focused on what their actual value is and not just regulations. Okay, so if they can have a coherent case around why we're building this, what their value is, then those questions make a lot of sense. and then they talk, with sense around the guide rails that they need to put up. They can come up with their assumptions that they need to do. And sometimes I'll do workshops and we'll do Socratic questioning. A lot of different types of questions of is this true, your assumption? And once they pick that up and start questioning themselves and each other, it goes a lot faster because they can pick up all these implicit assumptions that nobody actually bothered verifying. And then sometimes in the middle of the workshop, they'll get this whole list of, I checked that, that's not true. Oh yeah, that's not true either. I just went and I stepped out, and you get all these things, and they start thinking in that way about, is this true? Are these assumptions valid? Can I validate them? Can I test around them? And that just really comes back to the basic things that they should be doing anyway. They do their happy path. You come into a developed user story, they describes the happy path. And I'm saying be more explicit. Put guardrails around the happy path. Be explicit around the unhappy path. And these are things that a lot of times you'll see anyway. I'm just saying just do a little bit more about being explicit about protecting that value. And again, this is nowhere near a full-size stride matrix. It's not good enough. And I could come in and I have no doubt that within 3 hours I'll find dozens of stride threads. But that's fine because they're doing it. This is the way to scale is getting them to do the basics.
And by having them do it and think about it themselves, it means each iteration of them going through this process, they're going to get better and better, not only on what's not real, but some of the things that are potentially real that they have to address. So that learning themselves kind of creates this good loop for them to continue to refine and get better every time they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're asking about pitfalls, and that's one of the biggest pitfalls I see. That people, especially developers, are scared of getting started. It's like, I don't know all the threats. How am I going to think about it? That's fine. I'm not asking you to know about everything. I'm not asking you to put together a perfect threat model. Just get started, and each iteration you go, you'll get a little bit better. And are you leaving a lot of threats on the table? Sure. But you're already starting, if you get a consultant to come in or the security team comes in, they're already starting at a pretty good baseline and not 3 miles below the floor, which is most often our problem nowadays.
Well, and I like one of the things I like is that you're going out to developer conferences to have these discussions, speak to developers, and you're really talking about that, emphasizing the developer first approach throughout this particular discussion we're having now. And for those listeners or for those who are listening and perhaps aren't seeing the video, Avi is sporting a pretty cool OWASP Israel shirt. So I'm curious, kind of along this vein, OWASP obviously has great meetups, throughout the world and all kinds of communities, for typically AppSec or security people to show up to. Have you gotten developers to come to your OWASP meetings as well?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So the OWASP chapter hosts the yearly AppSec Israel conference. Well, not this year, obviously. We usually hold it around September. Tail end of the summer, beautiful time to come to Tel Aviv. So plan for next year. We have a really great mix. I think last year we had around 850 people come. And this is a free conference. First day we have developer training, basics of security, secure coding and things like that. We usually get 200 to 300 developers come to this. And to the conference day itself, usually close to half are developers. So we have a great mix of really deep security research, as you'd expect in Israel. But we also have a lot of, I wouldn't call them one-on-one talks, but very, very, very much developer-oriented talks of how to implement things the right way in design and threat modeling and things around code and DevOps and a lot of things like that. So it's a really great conference, by the way. If you happen to be in Tel Aviv next year, definitely worth coming to.
Yeah, I definitely have to be checking the 2021 calendars, I think, for everyone. But that still is a great. I love that fact that you're bringing the developers to the conference and attracting them, because it's much better than that echo chamber of reminding everybody else of what the threat modeling is. Here's the 4-question model. Here's the 3-question version, and so on. And actually going back to who's actually writing the code. Yeah.
Again, the 4-question framework is great for some teams. Some teams that are not that well integrated are not going to have a strong security team, security champion involved in doing this. That's why I say let's go in a slightly different area. And when it comes to AppSec Israel, somebody once told me most security conferences are about blinky lights, hacky, that's great. AppSec Israel is about building things the right way. Very boring gray boxes.
Well, you've been talking quite a bit about, and John brought this up too, of like, does this fit for all organizations, or how does the approach change for different teams? I'm kind of curious too, because OWASP also has the OpenSAM project. How would does that relate strongly to here, or is there a good way to tie that into this type of discussion so that organizations can kind of figure out where they are on this particular maturity model?
Uh-oh.
That was the one question that Avi couldn't handle. I think we might have had a blip on his audio. We'll wait another couple seconds,
nope, I'm still here.
Otherwise, okay, perfect. So if you did hear the question, it was about OpenSAM. Yes.
I heard it. I started talking, I guess you didn't hear it. Yeah, so I was saying I love the OpenSAM. It's a great project. The latest version actually changed quite a bit. A part of what they changed in the last version was a lot more developer team oriented and less security consultant around the developer teams. And I think that's great because it's a very useful tool now for developer teams. You still need a security champion or somebody to really be able to drive it and to understand, but they can easily take that and plug that in. I've been doing some experiments around OpenSAM with Wardley mapping, which shows kind of an evolution of security maturity, using basically the same concept of OpenSAM, but being able to graph that and seeing the movement of evolution. Wardley Maps is a great tool. Probably don't have enough time to go into that now. But yeah, it's very interesting to think about how to build an AppSec program around the maturity of OpenSAM.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've only I haven't ever generated and worked with Wardley Maps directly, but I was reading up on them. And from what you were just saying too, that sounds like an approach perhaps, planning out an AppSec program or planning out a security development lifecycle. So your audience then perhaps becomes more of the CISO for that, or at least when you're starting. Does that sound about right? Or, how would you suggest someone to also approach Wardley mapping or having this discussion with, going into an organization?
So I'm far from a Wardley expert, and there's take it from Dennis Cruz, got me into Wardley Maps for security, much bigger expert than I am. But I am seeing it, and there's something that they talk about a lot, that it's great tool for collaboration, for getting people on the same page. So for example, it's not just to go to the CISO with a Wardley map, but to get the CISO and the VP-R&D at the same table to talk about what is important and where to focus. Because we can't do an AppSec program all at once. We can't roll it out to everything. So where's the most important parts? Where are the parts where we're going to get the most value from? That comes back to value driven. I'm consistent.
You're definitely consistent. Whatever marketing background you may or may not have had, that you're definitely exercising well. And I want to give you another chance. Speaking of a marketing background, over the next couple of months, is there anything that you wanted to highlight? Anything you'll be working on, or you wanted to share with us?
I don't know if you're referring to anything specific, but the next couple of months we're going to be working on getting over the current situation. I'm sorry to say. Sure, a lot of people are having a lot harder time than I am right now. My office is always attached to my house, so working from home is standard operating procedure for me. Just have more kids around. 5. That's why I drink at night. Yeah. I see somebody rolling eyes.
We drink all the time. What are you talking about, Avi? It doesn't have to be night.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, especially for being as busy as you are, I want to thank you, Avi, for spending some time with us and giving us definitely a good and different perspective on a way to go into value-driven threat modeling. That's really neat.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. I want to say thanks again to Avi. Thanks to Matt and John, and thanks to everyone who's been listening. We're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to return with News of the Week.